The morning sun stretched long across the open prairie, laying its golden hand over a weathered ranch that seemed too quiet for life. Dust lifted in little sighs as the wind pushed through the grass, brushing against the boards of a house that stood with more memory than cheer. Inside, Elias McGraw moved through the silence of his chores with a heaviness that clung to him like another coat. Every sound, the scrape of a chair, the hollow clank of a pan, echoed against the emptiness that had been carved deep since his wife's passing. He was a man of few words, and now, with no one left to hear them, he had grown even fewer. Some mornings he thought of selling, letting the prairie reclaim the house the way it had claimed his laughter. But still, he woke, saddled, worked, as though labor itself might keep the loneliness at bay. Then came a knock. It wasn't loud, just 3 even taps on the wood. But it cut through the air so clean, Elias felt it not in his ears, but in his ribs, as if it had been waiting years to sound. He froze, hand on the table, heart stalled in its beat. When he opened the door, he found a woman standing there, her calico dress faded from too many washings, her hem still dusty from the road. Her back was straight, though, her chin lifted, not in pride, but in a quiet refusal to bow. Her eyes were the kind that carried the weight of storms weathered, yet refused to break. "I was told you need a cook," she said. The words were plain, but behind them lay a steadiness that kept Elias from shutting the door outright. Then he saw her, a child, peeking shyly from behind the woman's skirts, a little girl with wide eyes, no older than 6, holding a rag doll whose missing arm had been stitched over and over. She clutched it as though the last threads were still enough to keep it whole. Elias felt something shift inside him, though he masked it well. He cleared his throat, stepping back a little too quickly, his jaw hardening. "I don't need help," he muttered. His voice sounded harsher than he meant it to. The woman nodded once, neither begging nor breaking. "Thank you for your time," she said. She took the child's hand and turned away, her steps careful, her back as straight as when she'd come. Elias stood there longer than he should have, the image of the girl's hungry eyes lingering like a weight on his chest. When the child looked back once, a faint hope flickering before she turned again, he nearly called after them. Nearly. Instead, he shut the door, and the sound of it felt like sealing a coffin. That evening, he sat alone at the table. His supper lay cold, untouched, though he'd forced it down just the same. The house felt emptier than ever, the air carrying no sound but his own slow chewing. Yet somewhere in that silence, he heard it again, the echo of a small girl's voice. The clink of his fork felt like judgment. The wind pressed against the windows, rattling them, as though the prairie itself were knocking once more. By dawn, he had almost convinced himself it had been nothing, just another ghost stirred by memory. But when he stepped outside, the truth waited. There, on his porch, lay a loaf of bread, rough but warm, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Beyond, near the corral, he saw her, Claire Monroe, sleeves rolled, chopping wood with practiced rhythm. Rosalie sat nearby in the dirt, threading wildflowers into a crooked crown, humming tunelessly to herself. Elias's first instinct was anger, not at her, but at the feeling she stirred in him. Pride rose sharp in his throat. He walked toward her with a frown. "I told you I don't need help." Clara paused only to wipe her brow, then went back to splitting. "I know," she said simply, and that was all. He could not accuse her of begging. She asked nothing, could not accuse her of weakness. She worked harder than most men he knew. She did not argue. She simply was, and that unsettled him more than if she'd pleaded. Later, in town, he found the whispers already circling. 2 matrons by the mercantile leaned together like buzzards. "That widow woman's got nerve," one hissed, dragging her child to the McGraw place. Focal talk. Another voice, sharper, from the shopkeeper's wife. "Hungry for land, that one. I seen it before. Ain't decent." Elias felt the sting of their words like burrs under his skin. Shame, not for himself, but for the woman who had stood so straight on his porch. He left the store quicker than he came, the weight of those whispers following him all the way home. That night, near dusk, he found them again. Clara and Rosalie hadn't gone far, though they kept to the edge of his land, as though waiting without trespassing. The woman's face was calm, but the girl's head drooped with sleep, her small body leaning heavy against her mother's skirts. For a long time, Elias just stood there, the distance between them thick with things unsaid. Then he sighed, scratching the back of his neck. "The old bunkhouse is empty," he muttered. "You can use it for now. Roof don't leak much." Clara's chin dipped in a small nod. "Thank you," she said softly. "No more. No less." But Rosalie, half asleep as she was, lifted her face just enough to smile, small and trusting. And in that smile, Elias felt something crack open inside him, something he hadn't realized had hardened so much. That night, as the prairie sank into silence, Elias lay awake in his bed. Through the walls of the house, he swore he could almost hear it, the faint sound of laughter carried from the bunkhouse. Light, tired laughter of a child who still found joy in the smallest things. And for the first time in years, the silence of his ranch did not feel like a coffin. It felt like possibility. The days began to take on a rhythm, quiet but steady, like a creek running over stones. Clara's presence softened the house without rearranging it. Meals warm and simple on the table, the air filled with the faint hum of her voice as she worked. Rosalie followed Elias around the ranch like a shadow, small boots trailing his larger ones, questions spilling from her as she tugged on the reins of his patience. Yet, instead of irritation, he found himself slowing down to answer, to show her how to brush a horse, how to mend a strap, how to listen to the wind before a storm. Elias felt his grief stretch in a new way. Not vanish, never vanish, but shift, like a sore muscle finally moving again after years of stiffness. He did not speak of it aloud. He hardly ever spoke of anything. But the house no longer echoed so sharply. The bunkhouse glowed at night with lamplight, and the stillness that had once gnawed him hollow now seemed to cradle something tender. But prairie peace is never safe from gossip. At the mercantile one afternoon, Elias caught the tilt of heads, the darting eyes. He didn't need to hear the words to know their shape. Clara, waiting for flour with Rosalie pressed to her skirts, overheard more than shadows. Living under his roof, bold as brass, one woman whispered loud enough to cut. A widow making herself comfortable. While folks think of Rosalie, growing up with that kind of example. Clara's cheeks flushed hot. She paid without raising her head, fingers trembling around the coin, and left the store with her dignity held so stiff it looked like it might shatter. That night she was quieter, her smile strained, her voice only half there. Elias saw it, but didn't know how to reach across the distance. He was a man raised to mend with silence, not words. Yet her withdrawal gnawed at him more than the gossip ever had. Then came the storm. The sky broke open in sheets of rain, the kind that drowned the earth in minutes. Wind clawed at the shutters, and thunder cracked, so near it rattled the dishes in their cabinets. Elias hurried to the barn, the horses wild-eyed with fear. Clara was already there, skirts soaked, hair plastered to her cheeks, hauling at a rope with more grit than sense. She slipped in the mud, and his hand shot out to catch her before she fell. Lightning lit the world white, and in that flicker their eyes locked. Not romance, no. Something deeper. Recognition. The wordless understanding of two people who had been broken by life, each holding the other steady against the storm. When the thunder roared again, Rosalie came running, crying, clutching her rag doll to her chest. Without thinking, Elias wrapped an arm around her. Clara pressed close beside him. For a moment, in the trembling barn, with rain hammering the roof and the world shaking outside, they stood like a family already bound. The next morning dawned sharp and clear, the prairie scrubbed clean. The roof of the house had leaked in the night, and Elias climbed up to repair it. Clara steadied the ladder, Rosalie passing nails with solemn importance, her small hands dirty and proud. Laughter rose unexpectedly between them. Real laughter, bright against the wide sky. And Elias realized he had not laughed in years, not like this. The ranch no longer felt like his alone. It felt like theirs. But the world would not grant them peace without a fight. At the saloon a week later, a cluster of men with too much whiskey and too little decency leaned against the bar, tongues sharpened. McGraw's got himself a stray woman and her brat. One drawled, a smirk curving his lip. Can't blame him, I suppose. Man's desperate enough to keep anything that'll cook his supper. Laughter rippled, crude and careless. Elias, who had swallowed silence his whole life, set down his glass with a thud. He turned slow, his shoulders squared, his voice steady. That woman's got more grit than half the men in this room. She feeds me, works beside me, and asks nothing. Don't mistake your own weakness for her strength. The room stilled. The smirks faltered. Elias did not wait for a reply. He left them with their shame in their cups and walked into the night air, chest tight with something close to pride. But when he reached home, he found Clara already packing, her face pale with resolve. I won't have Rosalie grow up with people spitting at her shadow, she said softly, hands folding what little they owned. Her voice carried no anger, only the exhaustion of a woman who had fought too many battles already. Elias stood in the doorway, his throat locked. For a long moment, the silence stretched between them like the yawning canyon of all his years of grief. He saw her shoulders stiffen, saw Rosalie clutching her rag doll, eyes wide with confusion. And he knew if he let them leave, the house would indeed return to being a grave. His voice broke from him rough, unpolished. If you walk away now, he said, this house goes back to being nothing but a coffin. I've lived with the dead long enough. Clara froze, her back still to him. Slowly, she turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't know if I can stay, she whispered. Elias stepped closer, the truth trembling raw in his voice. I don't know if I can be what you need. But I know this. Since you came, there's been laughter in these walls. And that's worth more than any man's gossip. Rosalie's small hand slipped into his, unafraid, as though the choice had already been made. Clara's eyes fell to their joined hands, then back to his face. For the first time since she'd come to his door, her chin lowered, not in defeat but in release. And though no vows were spoken, no promises inked, something stronger settled between them, an unspoken pact to keep walking forward, together. That evening, they walked the pasture at sunset. Rosalie skipped ahead, chasing the long shadows of cattle, her laughter ringing across the land. Clara and Elias walked side by side, their silence now full, not empty. Above them, the sky burned with gold, and the prairie wind carried the sound of life where once there had been only stillness. And perhaps, in that moment, it was not about cowboys and widows, not about gossip or shame, but about the way broken souls find each other in the wilderness, mending not by grand gestures, but by staying when the easier road is to leave. So if you are listening, friend, take this truth with you. Sometimes the knock at your door is not an intrusion, but salvation. Sometimes the ones you turn away are the very ones sent to save you. And if ever you feel cast aside, remember, dignity is not in being welcomed everywhere, but in finding the one place where your presence finally feels like home.